Hello, hope you're all doing marvellously well. Adam Steele here, and that's what Warren would say. This is the Behind Music Tech podcast. This week, we are talking to Rodger Cloud from Cloud Microphones. Now, if you've not heard of Cloud Microphones, this might ring a bell. The Cloudlifter. That's the piece of gear that a lot of us use, little kind of blue box that you put in between a quiet microphone like a Ribbon or something like an SM57 and an interface, and it bumps the level up significantly without adding noise. They're everywhere. You see them all throughout our recording industry these days. And it turns out that that's not what the company were kind of aiming to do originally. They were and are ribbon mic enthusiasts. So without further ado, let's talk to Rodger Cloud. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came into this whole business and what your experience has been before becoming a member of Cloud Microphones.
Sure. Well, I've sort of been involved with music most of my life in some form or another. I started out with a little bit of violin and trumpet as a youngster there. I wasn't very good at it, to be honest, but by the time I became a teenager, I thought the guitar was way more cool. So so I started playing guitar and eventually writing songs and getting involved with bands. And what's interesting, when I was before I really started playing guitar, I would record my own mixtapes, as we all did back then, from vinyl. And I just remember one of the standout moments that I can recall is that I used to go up to Detroit for the summers to visit my grandmother. And while I was there, we were kind of in pretty close proximity to the old Motown studio, Hitsville, USA, where Michael Jackson and many other greats recorded. So I used to go there, and they had a museum. This was in the mid '80s. And there was a museum there. I believe there still is. And I would look at the old RCA microphones and the recording equipment and some of the instruments that they had there. And I was quite in awe of it all. And that was around the time where I was sort of even just making my own mixtapes and stuff. So I was involved in recording from that aspect originally. And then as I started writing songs and playing guitar in my later teen years, I got, first with just a regular cassette, going through a little mixer, and then eventually a 4-track, and sort of worked my way up to what you see here eventually. But so that was inspiring for me. And around 2006 or so, I had a small recording studio and started working with Steve Sank, and started to, for the first time, I really got my hands on some of the RCA microphones and had a chance to try out different microphones, ribbon microphones in particular. And I was just really struck by them immediately, because it took me back to the early days of even just trying to record something simple with a guitar to a cassette or anything, any kind of tape medium. And just the depth that I heard in some of those microphones was just really inspiring me. And I sort of had the idea at the time that, wow, I've been doing it wrong this whole time. This is what I needed all along, with some of these ribbon microphones. So it was the love of ribbon microphones that really started us on this journey with Cloud. We eventually developed our own microphone out of doing a lot of repairs and so forth with the vintage microphones, which, can be quite a lot of work to sit there and refurb. Each one's different. You have a lot of different circumstances to deal with and a lot of unknowns. So at some point, after doing a lot of repairs and so forth, we said, why don't we just design something from the ground up? And so we designed the first Cloud ribbon microphone. And during that time, we also decided that we should definitely have an active version of the microphone because of the gain requirements. It's just, modern equipment mostly does not have what it takes to to process a ribbon microphone and bring it to line level without a lot of extra noise, because you're always at the end of your gain range at the preamp, and you still don't have enough sometimes. So enter the Cloudlifter, which was the original circuit that we designed for the ribbon microphone, and we put it in an external box just to test it and try it out. And that's kind of when we had an aha moment and realized, wait a minute, this is something very useful to work on and develop. So we developed that, and sort of when we launched the company, we originally had a 2-channel Cloudlifter and the ribbon microphones when we launched at AES in 2009, New York City.
I remember that vaguely. I was an avid reader of magazines like Sound on Sound at the time, and they were saying, what's this new thing? It could change the world. And now pretty much every engineer you can think of has got one in their toolbox, one of the Cloudlifters at least, which is seriously impressive going. I mean, it sounds like you just came across this niche that should have been filled and just kind of took the bull by the horns and really ran with that. But yeah,
absolutely.
Would you say that then it was your obsession with ribbons that drove you to work as an industry? Because were you a recording artist, engineer, and then kind of came into business side of things? Is that kind of how it came about, or was there something else that kind of drove you into industry?
Absolutely. I really wasn't a business person per se. I'm more of an artist type, like you said, recording engineer, recording artist. Like to work with microphones, capture sounds. It's definitely the ribbon microphones that drove this, the passion for that. And I became interested in, the first designs that we had were kind of for our own use, but I had this overwhelming sense, almost a duty, if you will, that the world needs this. This microphone that we came up with, the original JRS 34 ribbon microphone. It had so much depth and beauty. It made me feel as if all the things that I had been doing before were just wrong in a way compared to this. I mean, they all have their place, but there's just some sort of extra magic that happens with a ribbon microphone that you just can't really get with anything else. And I think it has a lot to do with the physical movement of the ribbon, how it's designed, how it responds to the sound waves in a very similar way that our ears work. It's a very physical thing. It's very simple technology. So, and we can get more into that later, but in short, it was the passion for ribbon microphones 100%. And so we've just sort of decided, okay, let's see what we can do here. It'd be really cool if we could make our own microphone and go into manufacturing. So we have something here in the U.S. called the Small Business Administration, SBA. And then they have a center here called the SBDC, which is the Small Business Development Center. It's an office funded by SBA and Small Business Administration to offer business counseling to startups and things like that. So we started going down there and meeting with a person named Tom Shambo, a wonderful man who helped us a lot with saying, okay, that's really great that you've got this cool mic and everything, but you need a plan. Business has a lot of different things that go into it. So he sort of sat down and walked us through it, helped us come up with our first plan, helped us create through a spreadsheet projections of what this company might look like, what the expenses might be on a monthly basis. We kind of tried to think it through, and he even helped us with finding an intern from the University of Arizona, a financial intern who actually came and interned with us and helped us fill in this financial model and build this financial model. So we created a 10-year spreadsheet that was, kind of tried to cover as many bases as we can, the cost of developing intellectual property and the rent and utilities, manufacturing costs, everything that we could think of, advertising. And then we try to put everything sort of on a percentage. Okay, we'll devote this much to advertising by percentage and so forth. So, it didn't exactly work out the way those spreadsheets suggested they might, and we weren't really thinking. I mean, the Cloudlifter kind of was part of it by the end, but we didn't realize how the Cloudlifter would just take off and become something that is just widely used. We didn't really see we're using a Cloudlifter right now with this EVRE27.
Right.
And it just, even with really nice preamps, as you can see, we have a lot of nice gear here, but there's still a use for this Cloudlifter. Even in this environment, it still helps with a mic such as this, where you have speech. It's not a very, high output source. It's not like putting it on a kick drum, for instance. And even with really nice preamps, you're still at the upper end of the gain range when you're working with a mic like this. So to have the Cloudlifter bring that level up, it really helps a lot to get a comfortable amount of headroom and signal with the mic. So we didn't really see that coming. We thought that our mic sales were just going to be spectacular but it all kind of worked out in the end, because the Cloudlifter sort of took off. The microphones was a longer build. It's a work in progress, and there's an education process that has to happen with ribbon microphones in particular, because it's not the first microphone you buy. It's not even the second or third. By the time you get to a ribbon microphone, you've already owned some dynamic microphones. You've probably got a nice condenser mic, a couple of them at least, and then by the time you get to ribbon microphones, you've already worked with these other microphones, so it's a totally different thing. But one of the things that I like to say about ribbon microphones is that they're almost an expert level microphone in the sense that there's some actual audio engineering that has to happen when you use a ribbon microphone. For example, the distance and the proximity, the angle and the proximity effect. Yeah. I'm just going to grab one here. I have one in front of Cloud microphone. Thank you. Got some. So here's one of the new Cloud ribbon microphones, the 44 passive. And so the angle that you come at will have a lot to do with how the sound is. When you're straight on, you get a lot more of that sound pressure. So sometimes that translates to a greater bass response, a little bit, sometimes too much even in the mids. Right. And one of the ways to deal with that is you can come at it off an angle. The side null rejection of the Cloud mics is excellent because they're really the same front to back. So it does an excellent job of rejecting the whole plane around the top, the sides, the floor. And but what's interesting is when you move the mic even a couple of inches closer, it sounds drastically different.
Right.
Not as much so with a nice condenser mic. You have some variation, but it's much more pronounced with a ribbon because the closer you get, the more emphasis you hear in the bass frequencies. So you can use your placement of the microphone as your equalizer.
And make a big difference.
So I like to say sometimes that it's an expert level microphone in that sense, is that it pushes you in the direction of having to do some actual audio engineering as opposed to just sticking a mic in front of something.
Right. Another thing that I've noticed about ribbon mics is I was very similar when I started out, that I had plenty of cheap dynamics, got a couple of budget level condensers, which were okay, and then over time got better equipment. I got a couple of cheap ribbon microphones, regretted that ever since. And something I've learned about ribbons is you should probably get good ones, or maybe just don't. Even though, like you were saying, it's quite a simple design. I wonder why that is. Is that precision building? Is that intent? Is that just quality control?
Yeah, well, there's a number of factors. I actually have one of our active microphones here that we just kind of opened up and took the covers off. Wow. You can kind of see the ribbon, perhaps. We'll get you some nice close-ups after the show.
Cool.
To add in. But, we tried to make it so there's not really anything in the way. And you see the grills here, they're very much reminiscent of the RCA microphones, particularly the 44 series. And The shape of the grills, there's actually some science behind that, and this is the same angles that you find with the early RCA microphones. They have the tendency to sort of help diffuse some of the sound waves as they come in. And you can use this microphone even without a pop filter because this acts as sort of a natural pop filter.
Wow.
Sometimes a secondary pop filter is not a bad idea, but in a pinch, I use them all the time without a pop filter. So the screens help that. And so what we've tried to do is just keep stuff out of the way. This ribbon that's inside is the same exact specs as the original 44 series, going back all the way to the 1930s with Harry Olson's first designs. The PB144, which, even the PB31, I think, had the same exact ribbon that evolved into the 44A, the RCA 44A. Which eventually the 44B and then the BX. And then it was replaced actually in the latter part of the RC era with the BK11 ribbon microphone. And the BK11 was sort of designed to be the replacement, and that came out in the early 70s. And that microphone really didn't get its due because RCA folded their microphone division in 1976.
Right.
So they didn't really have enough time to catch on like the 44 series did.
Yeah, you see the 44 in the classic Hollywood, everywhere, right?
Right.
So I suppose there is some part of that visual association with the branding.
Right. Absolutely. And, so it's a combination of things. I try to keep stuff out of the way inside so there's no parallel reflective surfaces. That's part of the magic of the screens here, is that you don't have flat surfaces with anything bouncing around back and forth. And it's really quite open inside. So it allows the sound wave to really be naturally captured by the ribbon itself, which of course is suspended in a magnetic field. The ribbon material is a factor. You were asking about, lower cost ribbon microphones and why some of them sound great and some of them don't. And sometimes the ribbons are just way too thick. The material is very difficult to work with.
Right.
And, we still cut them by hand. We have hand tools. We have a replica of Harry Olson's original prototyping tool, which was actually superior to the production line tools. It was an engineering shop tool.
Oh, wow.
And of course, Stephen Sank has that tool and inherited it from his father, John Sank. But so we were able to disassemble that and replicate it, and then make brand new ones that are essentially exactly the same as the 1930s, 40s version that he made in the engineering shop. So
that's awesome. So for anyone at home who doesn't know how a ribbon microphone is made compared to the other kind of domestic types of microphones, do you want to just give a quick overview of how they're made and why that kind of the really thin material is such an important part of that design?
So yes, of course we cut the ribbons by hand. We have some tooling that replicates the RCA tooling that we're able to cut on, and we use scalpels and it's like we're getting ready to do surgery or something when we set up to do our ribbons. And then that is run through a corrugation tool, and that gives you sort of a zigzag. If you're looking at it from the side, you can see it's like a zigzag sort of pattern. And then once we install it and tune it inside the microphone, that gives you some play with the ribbon. So it's got some flexibility to it. And what that does is it really just, if you can imagine speech even, is just, you can't really see it with the naked eye, the ribbon movements, but right. That ribbon's moving. It's so light and it has that shape to it. So which I'm very fond of. I've seen a lot of different types of designs in modern ribbon microphones. Some of them are very wavy looking. Some of them are flat up the middle with just corrugations at the end. I've seen corrugations that go up and down, such as in the old Bayer Dynamic microphones. They're ribbon microphones, but by Bayer Dynamic, like the M260 or M500.
Right.
Some of those designs. But I'm really a fan of the RCA way of doing it, where you have this sharp corrugation that's, like a zigzag all the way across the length of the ribbon. And because that gives you sort of a natural free-form flexibility to it, and it allows those nuanced sound waves, because, of course, sound, when you have a bass frequency, you've got it's a much larger wave, and it's a lot more pressure to it. And you could probably even see that more on the ribbon moving, where the finer details in the upper bands, the treble, if you will, the presence, those frequencies are much smaller waveforms, and you don't really see it with the naked eye moving the ribbon, but it does in a very subtle way. And that's why the weight of the ribbon material is very important. The way that the ribbon's corrugated, the way it's tuned and installed, all of these things become a factor, because if the wrong material, you won't hear any high frequencies. It'll sound like it's really dull.
Right.
That's why a lot of the budget ribbon microphones coming from Asia and so forth have a really dark sound, because there's just no sensitivity to those frequencies. And if you take an RCA microphone, for example, particular models, especially such as the 44 series or the 77 series, they're not particularly dark. I mean, of course, a condenser microphone will be brighter because of the technology itself, but they're not particularly dark, and they're not particularly lacking in the upper band frequencies. They're just incredibly natural, and they're not hyped. But then if you take some other designs that have different types of ribbon material or different types of corrugation patterns or all of the above, then suddenly it's a dark microphone. Maybe it's great on guitar cabs or something else, but not much else, right?
Right.
Not necessarily for a voice or for, an acoustic instrument or something where you want to have a little bit more of that high-end sparkle.
Yeah, I mean, I have noticed a couple of brands claiming their ribbons can reach up to, say, 20 kilohertz, which isn't the usual thing for a ribbon. I'm not even sure if that's entirely necessary with the ribbon design, as long as it sounds right and sounds nice. Something I've noticed is a lot of really good ribbons, even if the high end is kind of, tailing off a little, it's quite a natural tail off.
Right.
And it's something that you can easily manipulate with an EQ without it bringing horrible resonance out. I'm guessing that the aim with the Cloud 44 is the kind of consistency, so that every time you can just lift that out if you need, and there's no issues. Like you were saying, a lot of the vintage microphones, they're never quite the same. I'm guessing that kind
everyone's a little different. Sure.
Yeah, and so I'm guessing that's something you don't really want to repeat with a production model, so to speak.
And that was the idea. I wanted to create something here that we could reproduce every time and have it be spot on, exactly the same. And of course there's some physical differences, but they're very minor and nothing that would affect the sound. Each ribbon, of course, is hand corrugated, so, and hand tuned. But we have a spec, and honestly, we've been doing this. I mean, this was about 15 years ago when we started first working with all the RCA microphones and doing some refurbishments. We'd sell them on eBay and so forth. The idea originally was just to outfit the studio with some great mics, but I couldn't afford a new mic collection, so we tried to fix. We'd buy 3, fix 2, keep 1, or something like that. Until we had a nice collection going, and it was out of that we decided to go into production on our new model. But these days, and you could grab 2 Cloud mics that were produced at completely different times, as long as it's the same model, like the 44 passive or the JRS-34, for example. And they're darn near spot on. You could use them as a stereo pair. And now that said, we actually do like take a little extra care when we're making microphones so that sequential serial numbers are matched, you know, a little more precisely than that. But it's always interesting to me that you can grab two random Cloud mics and they are definitely close enough to use as a pair.
Amazing. I mean, that's something to be proud of, is that kind of consistency right there. But that brings me back to what you were saying about the 10-year plan and how that was kind of aiming towards these microphones being the thing. And then almost accidentally, the Cloudlifter comes along.
It was completely accidentally. Yeah, the whole thing was an accident. A happy accident, of course, but I just didn't see the whole thing coming with the dynamic microphones and even tube mics and all the different things that people use Cloudlifters for that aren't necessarily ribbons. Even when we first designed the Cloudlifter and said, this box is really cool, we just very quickly, you know, assumed that it was just going to be for ribbons. And then all of a sudden, you know, people started using them with mics like the SM7B or the RE20, and I started getting calls. And my first thought was, RE20, what? You're not using a ribbon? Why? You know, but I came to understand why that was, and I came to understand that dynamic microphones, especially large diaphragm dynamic microphones, such as the Sennheiser 421, RE20, RE27, like this one, or the SM7B, and many others. The large diaphragms mics are a lot weaker.
Yeah, they take a lot
output
to move physically. Yeah,
right. So and they're not quite as low in sensitivity as a ribbon, but they're pretty close. You know, they're not far off. So
yeah,
that sort of opened my eyes, and we sort of focused on that. And, as our customers were giving us that feedback, oh, this works great with my RE20, and we started getting those calls all the time. And then over time we realized, that the Cloudlifter, there are a lot of things that you can do with dynamic microphones, large diaphragm or small diaphragms, even like your basic SM57.
Yep.
That you can't really do unless you have a Cloudlifter, because it's fine for a loud source. You want to cram it into a guitar cabinet or do something that has a fair amount of output to it with a pretty nice preamp. But if you want to do something softer, like something like really soft finger picked guitar, or or speech, as people do these days with a lot of podcasts and so forth, you really benefit a lot from having the Cloudlifter, because now you're getting so much more of the actual microphone itself, and your preamp goes down dramatically in the gain that it needs.
Right.
And most preamps, even really modest and basic preamps, they sound pretty good in their first 1/3 or to 1/2 of their gain range. It's that second half and last 1/3 of the gain range where everything falls apart. And you get more of that noise and that white noise from the preamp itself, and the frequency response starts to change and everything sounds a little different. So, having more of the actual microphone itself from the Cloudlifter before it even gets to your preamp really allows you to have a lot of new possibilities that you can use different mic choices for, such as these soft sources that we're talking about, where 10 or 15 years ago, and even today to some extent, people might reach for a small diaphragm or large diaphragm condenser instead, because the output's so much stronger, it's easier to get in there. But if you have the Cloudlifter, then you have all these choices of dynamic microphones or ribbons, where the extra sensitivity that you get allows you to use a different tonal palette for a softer source than you might have had available to you before.
Hi guys, quick interruption here. Firstly, to say if you're listening to this on MP3 version, there is also the video version on my channel, Adam Steele. If you're watching this as a video, there is also the MP3 version, which is on Produce Like a Pro. So go and check that out for if you're on a long drive, that kind of thing, you want to listen to it rather than watch, etc. Also, this podcast is sponsored by me and by the Ultimate Reaper Guide on Pro Mix Academy. I wanted to tell you about it because it's something I always get excited about. It's the software that I use the most to get maximum results for audio production. I think it's better than Pro Tools, Cubase, all the other DAWs, and I show you right from the very beginning how to get it going, get past any hiccups that you might have at the start if you're not someone who's used the software before, then where to find everything, how to get going, how to record audio, manipulate MIDI, and all the funky features that make it awesome as well. So the link to that is down in the description. Check that out. Without further ado, back to me and Rodger.
Of course, and I think hand in hand the success here has kind of gone with the home recording revolution, because of course some people are using things like the Cloudlifter with, really nice preamps, like with that Rupert Neve desk you've got behind you there. But I think a lot of people are probably using the inexpensive, small little USB interfaces that are the absolute kind of zenith of what you were just describing about you try and get past the halfway point on the gain and things fall apart because they absolutely were not designed to do that.
Right.
But the fact that they opened up possibilities to people at home who then maybe couldn't afford the next leap in terms of kind of, external dedicated outboard preamps and all that kind of stuff, the solution presented itself as something that kind of made the whole system come alive. And like you said, you started with the 2-channel Cloudlifter. It mustn't have been very long before that 1-channel one became the big demand.
Right. No, we saw that. The thinking behind the 2-channel Cloudlifter was, honestly, and this speaks to the artistic side of where we came from, and not as much to the business side, but the thinking originally was, well, this is so good, you're going to want 2, and it's going to be easier for us to give you 2 in one package because it's going to cost less by having a single enclosure, etc. So that was sort of the thinking. We were so excited about it, So we made a 2-channel version, and then it was, of course, the popularity of the 2-channel that made us realize pretty quickly that there was going to need to be a single-channel version of this. And so when the single-channel version came out, we sort of, rebranded it a little bit. Instead of just Cloudlifter, it was the Cloudlifter CL1 and the CL2.
Right.
And it's always an interesting fact for people to find out that the CL2 was actually first.
Yeah. And of course, that's gone on to have a range now. There's the 4, and then now you started playing with impedance as well, the CLZ.
Sure. The Z, yeah.
So was that customer feedback, or was that something you were toying with?
Yeah, I saw the possibility of that from, that you could change the load, but it was actually a phone call from a customer. I remember I was on my way back, I believe from a NAMM show, and I was driving across the desert in Southern California, heading back to Arizona here, and a customer was on the phone, and we were talking, and he started telling me, well, one of the things that I really like to do is I made this little box with a resistor, and I brought put a load on my SM57 of like 500 ohms, and I really like the way that sounds on like guitar amps and so forth, and it got me thinking. My wheels started turning. I said, I thought to myself, it wouldn't be that hard to create a new Cloudlifter with continuously variable impedance, so that you could hear those tonal differences. So once I got home and settled back in and got back to work, we just started building some prototypes of that concept. And I remember the first time we built one with a knob on it, and we tried it, and it was actually with an RE20 microphone, and it was just an incredible difference that we heard when we would put that load really low on the dial compared to high. Right. You know, when you go really low, it seems like the mid range becomes more forward, and you get sort of a bit of almost like smearing of the transients on the top. You know, it's a little more mid-range focus. But then when you go the other way and you go to a really high impedance with the dynamic mics and the ribbons for that matter, I hear a fatter bass response and a little more presence on the top end in the upper bands. So it's like an EQ that's not an EQ. Right. In a way. You can't get that sound with an EQ, but through the load, you're resisting the sound of the microphone in such a way that it's allowing certain frequencies to come through more than others. So when you go to a higher load, you get a different sound than when you load it down to, say, 500 ohms or something.
Right, yeah. It's a funny thing I think a lot of younger engineers have no idea about, that really old, like 50s and 60s kind of radio standards, we would have to match the impedance, which is where the 600 comes from. They were supposed to be matched together, and then at some point the idea was changed to be so that your input is a way higher impedance than the source, and that kind of became standard. But that shift, yeah, like you say, it gives quite a big tonal change. And it's fascinating how opening these ideas back up to younger engineers, or even people who do remember, but now everything is kind of fixed in the kind of new style. They remember how things used to sound. It can just be something like you've got there with the CLC.
Right. So here's the Z here. So yeah. So this one we actually have a pretty broad range. So at the very low end, you can go all the way down to 150 ohms. Wow. Which is pretty low.
Yeah.
And lower than you'd want in most cases, but for an effect or for a different sound, we wanted to maximize the differences in tone that you could get.
Of course.
With the Z. And so it goes up to about 15K is what it measures.
Wow, that's really high. But that I would imagine would suit some ribbons where you want to get more kind of detail and high end and low end. But I suppose then I've got a couple of preamps here where I can play with the impedance, but I tend not to because it drops the gain, and then we're back in the old territory of pushing for that extra bit of gain. Because that's got, is that a 15 dB, 20 dB boost that's in there?
Well, it's up to about 25. It depends, you know, you get more, you do lose some gain when you go to a really low impedance, as you said. And that was sort of the magic of the Cloudlifter Z, in my opinion, was because you have that really clean gain attached to it, even if you do lose some of it at the lower settings, it actually empowers you to use a very low impedance without having to suffer the consequences that you'd normally see. For example, you were talking about your preamps. Most of the time that gain loss is so dramatic that it impacts your ability to get a clean sound.
Yeah, right.
And that was part of the idea. Even with the original Cloudlifter, we have a 3K load, which is sort of right up the middle with the Cloudlifter Z.
Sure.
To me is like the best of both worlds. It's low enough to tighten the bass a little bit and have sort of a nice sound that's overall even across a great number of different microphones. And there are many different schools of thought. Some people like really high impedance with ribbon microphones. I tend to like the 3K load as a starting point for most things with, you know, when it comes to ribbons, because it tightens the bass just enough. I find that if I'm really high impedance, that the bass can get a little sloppy, for lack of a better word, a little bit out of control, a little bit overwhelming. So that bit of tightening that you can get, but through the load, to me is very useful. But everyone has a different philosophy, and some people like the very high impedance sound. So that's sort of why we designed the Cloudlifter Z the way we did, so that you could get those tonal variations and even to a very low impedance without actually ruining your sound, so to speak, because of the noise and the things that happen if you were to try to do that with a preamp, you know.
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you've really kind of thought out each one of these products rather than just, there are companies that will just throw a new product on the market every year. Got to have something new. And that's definitely seems like the opposite kind of philosophy to what you've got there, because it's not a huge range, is it? Which is a good thing.
It's not a huge range. It's funny because, there's been trade shows sometimes where, the question's always, what's new?
Yeah.
And there were a few years there we didn't really design anything new. We were very focused on the Cloudlifter series. I mean, we had the Z, we had the regular CL1, CL2, CL4. There's also a ZI where you can use that same impedance trick with your instruments.
Right.
It's a DI, but it also has a combo jack, so you can use it with a microphone or an instrument.
Okay.
I like it with instruments because it has a really nice instrument transformer. From Cinemag for high impedance to low impedance. So it takes the instrument level and adapts it to mic level and then feeds it into the Z sort of architecture there. And so once we had that sort of line of products, we kind of took a break from, we were still working on developing things, but we didn't launch new products every year at every show for a while, because we were, my answer to the question was really that why would we need to make anything new? This hasn't even reached its potential yet. So we were very focused on spreading the word about the Cloudlifter and getting it where it needed to go. And now that it's there, we've started to come out with new products such as the microphone, and we have some other new products coming very soon. But yeah, in short, we wanted to focus on doing a few things really, really well than a bunch of things just okay.
It's a really good philosophy to have. And that leads me into perfectly the next kind of question, so to speak, which is that the success of the Cloudlifter, has that been kind of a burden on your time, or the opposite direction, has that enabled you to have the resources to start looking at things like new products, which you already kind of started to answer there?
So, with the supply chain issues, it was the little headers on the board that became an issue, and it became such an issue that it was easier for us to just make them
right.
custom than it was to get the part that we had been ordering all along. So we eventually did that. But fortunately, because our supply chain was all local and still is, between metal shops here in Tucson, Arizona, we have our powder coats and screen printing in Phoenix, and then, of course, our circuit board manufacturing and assembly on the Navajo reservation in northern Arizona. And because of that, we were able to stay in stock throughout pretty much the whole pandemic. There was about 3 weeks there we couldn't fulfill, and we got behind it. And then it took us about 4 months to sort of catch up after that, so that we were, typically we ship within a few days of an order. And when I say an order, I mean at the dealer level, distributor level.
Right.
Because we don't sell direct here. But when everyone else was out of stock and all the products were unavailable because everyone was so heavily dependent on parts made in Asia and so forth.
Yeah.
We
that
were
definitely
in
affected
stock.
everybody. But that's good
Right.
to know that you were the one issue you had, you managed to find a way around. Yeah. You mentioned there that some of your stuff is everything's made locally, including being made in the Navajo Nation. Now, as an English person, I have absolutely no idea what that entails. So I am fascinated if you would be so kind
Sure.
as to tell me about what that kind of entails.
So the Navajo Nation, Navajo Reservation, if you will, is the largest Native American reservation in the United States. It actually spans 4 states. It's in the northeastern corner of Arizona, northwestern corner of New Mexico, southwestern corner of Colorado, and southeastern corner of Utah. So the 4 Corners area is all part of the Navajo Nation. Wow. And they're like a sovereign nation in a sense, as they have their own president, their own legislature, etc. But they are part of the United States at the same time, federally protected and so forth. So there's a company up there that we work with that we actually discovered in 2011, right when we were launching the CL1. And they're called Twadine Industries. And they're circuit board manufacturers. Through the late 80s and 90s, they used to do stuff for Apple and a lot of car manufacturers and others. And we connected with them right before 2011 when we launched the CL1, and we've been with them ever since. They're very high tech people. There's a video on our website called "Made in the USA, Made on the Navajo Nation," and it was filmed quite a while ago now, about 8 years ago. But it was through the International Trade Administration, and the United States Commerce Department wanted to sort of promote their services, which we've reached out to them in the past and work with them as we have tried to expand our exporting and so forth over the years. So they help companies with exporting and trying to find partners in other countries and so forth. So they shot that video to sort of highlight some of their programs, but there's some great footage in there of the manufacturing operation up in the Navajo Nation, and one of the things that struck me is the way they talk about it themselves. They equate it to their ancestor days of creating fine jewelry and fine art and some of the sand paintings that they've done. It's a very and beadwork and other types of fine arts. For them, it's very similar to that because they're creating a quality circuit board, and they're soldering and circuit board manufacturing, and they sort of view it that way, and that's their attitude about it, which, of course, instills quality into the product and culture too. So, every single Cloudlifter, every cloud microphone that has a Cloudlifter circuit in it, it's all been manufactured there by the basically grandmothers and other people on the Navajo Nation that are very excited about what they do, and they love what they do, and they instill that sense of quality in the product. And one of the things that's really amazing about the partnership with them is that, if you look geographically where the Navajo Nation is, it's quite far from the bigger cities. The closest one maybe being Flagstaff, Arizona, which is still quite small. And so, having high-tech jobs and a manufacturing facility on the Navajo Nation allows many of these people to have a high-quality, good-paying work, good-paying jobs right there within their own culture, so they don't have to leave and move to Phoenix or move to Tucson or move to Denver or some other big city to get work. So it's we're very proud of it. It makes us feel good. It's very consistent with our vision and our mission of wanting to do something good for the community. I mean, it wasn't enough for us to just want to make great products, but we wanted it to be sort of a win all the way across the board for the customer, for the local community here, and just to be able to manufacture responsibly and be proud of what you do without feeling like, you need to get it cheaper or better from, a better price and from some foreign country, that you can't, you don't really have your eyes on it. So it's out of sight, out of mind. I just didn't want to go that route. We were determined not to, and we still haven't. We've stayed true to our values.
Good for you. Pride and care is it's worth a lot. I mean, it means that you can have every product you make and say this was made with care. That definitely counts for something. I mean, there are, different business models. Somehow stack them high, sell them cheap, but it sounds like you've definitely not gone down that road, and you want everything to be as good as it can be, and that's a very laudable thing to do.
It's wonderful, and we also have control over it too. So if there's an issue, I can drive 15 minutes, and I'm where the metal's being produced. I'm an hour away from where the screen prints are done. So it's much better for us in that sense, and it really paid off during the pandemic. We actually received a Presidential E-Star Award last year in 2021.
Right.
We flew to Washington and went to a ceremony there at the United States Commerce Department. And it was in recognition of the fact that our U.S.-based manufacturing brings new revenue into the United States and into this area without it going right back out to another, some overseas manufacturing. So it creates jobs right here at home, and it gives us the ability to maintain control of the quality and everything that we're doing.
Amazing. So just to round this podcast out, something I've picked up on a few times in what you've said there is that at every stage when you've wanted to do something new that you're not sure about or expand, you've reached out to people. And this being the Behind Music Tech podcast, I think it'd be interesting to speak on that to people who are trying to get into the business or expand the business, of how important that is to reach out to people who do know the industry and know who to talk to and who to put you in contact with, that all the opportunities can be right there. Yes.
Well, one of the things that I've tried to do as a entrepreneur, if you will, and a creative type at the same time, is always try to go outside of myself to find the right kind of help, because I figure there's probably, when it comes to certain things like finances or manufacturing, I've had to learn a lot. This has been a real education for me and over the years. But one of the things that I've always tried to do is find someone that's better than me at it to work with or get some help or advice from, because no matter how much you think there's always someone that knows a little bit more about something very specific. So I've done that all along, and we continue to do that even now. I still work with my U.S. Commerce representatives on some of our international challenges, particularly in Mexico and Asia right now at the moment, and some of the different intellectual property issues that come up and so forth. We continue to do that, and anyone that's really getting into any kind of business that has to do connected to music or anything else for that matter, my advice would be look outside yourself for help, and try to find smart people that want to be a part of it.
Amazing. Well, Rodger, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. It was a real pleasure. And I've watched some of your videos. I like what you guys are doing over there.
Well, thank you.
And,
I hope you didn't have to watch the 6-hour video about speakers.
Yeah, I didn't quite have 6 hours, but, it's interesting that you talked about, wanting to get help from others. And you mentioned in your email that you had met with some of the folks at AEA.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your email that you had met with some of the folks at AEA, and we're talking with them about 2 years ago, or maybe close to 3 now, before the pandemic. Wes Dooley over there was, we have all been communicating. There were some issues with ribbon material, and we were concerned about, if that was going to impact the future of ribbon microphones. And we had a conference at Wes's place in Pasadena there, and we talked a lot about the issues with the ribbon material and the being able to get it and so forth. And we all sort of worked together to solve an industry-wide problem.
Well, that's probably worth talking about. I'll cut this in somewhere, but it's interesting to me that, I talked to the guys at AEA at NAMM and Extinct Audio. I know those guys as well. They're UK-based.
Sure.
And it seems like it's just a small industry of obsessive kind of people who really are driven by that common love of the art. And so there doesn't seem to be any kind of nasty competition. It's very much everybody helping everybody else, which it's
very friendly.
It's good to see that there is room in the industry to be competition and still help each other out, because I suppose a rising tide lifts all ships.
I agree with that 100%. It definitely does. And, if we can collectively educate people more about ribbon microphones and why they're beautiful and why we love them, then it's going to help everyone in the end, because every microphone's a little bit different. Every microphone has its own character, if you will, or kind of, gives you a tonal palette that might be a little bit different from someone else. So in that sense, I don't really see the competition as competition, because we're doing our own thing. If this is the sound you want, you've got to get it here. If you want that sound, it's probably good too. You might use it for something else. But they're all useful and they're all beautiful, especially people like Wes Dooley and others that are, have done it from the heart, if you will, as opposed to from the wallet.
And so there you go, Rodger Cloud, and what a fascinating man, fascinating equipment that they make, the microphones, the Cloudlifters, all that stuff. And I'm really excited to see what we have coming from them in future. Talking about the future, we're going to be interviewing Martin, the CEO of Austrian Audio, next. They're a fascinating company where they were kind of made from the ashes of AKG's microphone division, and they've really built some awesome stuff up over the last few years. So yeah, that's going to come in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, big thanks to all the patrons on Patreon who support me. Big thanks to Produce Like a Pro for hosting the podcast, and a big thanks to everybody watching. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.